I want to tell this from the perspective of someone who worked inside the station, because I think it changes the texture of the fear. When you're a customer, you're passing through. When you work there, the building is yours, and there's a particular kind of violation in having that safety compromised. I was 19 when I took the job at a full-service station in a small community about 2 hours north of any city you'd know by name. It was a genuine small-town station. The owner knew every regular by first name. The pumps were the old kind with spinning number dials. And on weekday mornings, we served coffee out of a 30-year-old machine that nobody had ever thought to replace because it still worked perfectly well. I worked evenings and weekend mornings. The evening shift ran until 10 when we closed. I was usually alone from about 7 onward. The building had a specific layout that mattered. The cashier's booth was a narrow, enclosed space with a sliding window facing the pump island and a door at the back that led to the small stockroom. The stockroom had a loading door at the rear that opened to the back lot, a narrow strip of asphalt behind the building where deliveries came in and where we put the trash. The back lot was not lit. This became relevant. The first evening I became uneasy was in late autumn, maybe 2 months into the job. A car pulled up to pump 3 at around 8:30, and a man got out. Ordinary looking, older, ball cap and work coat. He came to the window, paid for his fuel, went back to his car. Normal. While he was pumping, I noticed he kept looking toward the side of the building rather than at his car, with a frequency that caught my attention. Not alarmed, not suspicious, just looking, regularly, as if he was checking something. I followed his eye line. He seemed to be looking toward the gap between the building and the neighboring fence, which was dark and narrow and connected essentially to the back lot. His car finished. He replaced the nozzle, drove out. I watched the gap between the building and the fence for a while. Nothing moved. I told myself the man had been looking at nothing in particular. People let their eyes wander. Over the following 2 weeks, I noticed a pattern that I can only describe as a presence at the back of the building. Sounds, mostly. A soft scrape of something against the loading door once. What might have been footsteps on the asphalt of the back lot on a night when the wind was low enough that I could hear clearly through the stockroom wall. On one occasion, a distinct sound of the exterior loading door handle being tried, not opened, just tested, a brief resistance against the bar, then released. I checked the loading door each time I heard something near it. Locked. Always locked. I had locked it myself at the start of each shift. I mentioned the sounds to the owner when I saw him, framing it as a question about whether animals came around back. He told me there was occasionally a problem with raccoons near the trash, which was plausible. I accepted it and kept paying attention. The night the pattern broke was a Thursday in December. The station was quiet. We'd had maybe a dozen customers between 5 and 9. At 9:15, with 45 minutes before close, I was restocking the refrigerator cases from the stockroom when the light in the stockroom flickered. Not unusual. Old building. The stockroom light had always been slightly temperamental. I reached up and tapped the fixture the way I'd learned to, and it steadied. I went back to the refrigerator case. And then I noticed the smell. Cigarette smoke. Fresh, not residual. In the stockroom, which was an interior room with no windows and only 2 doors, the one to the cashier's booth, which I'd just come through, and the loading door. I walked back through to the cashier's booth and called the owner. He answered after 3 rings, and I told him what I was describing. He didn't ask me to verify further. He told me to step outside to the pump island, stay where I was visible from the road, and wait. He arrived in 11 minutes, which told me he'd driven faster than the speed limit. He and I checked the loading door together. Locked. But when he examined the mechanism closely, he knew that door better than I did. He pointed out something I wouldn't have known to look for. The interior bar lock had a small secondary latch that could, with the right tool and specific knowledge of that model of door hardware, be reset from outside into the locked position after being opened. He was quiet for a while after he showed me that. He called the non-emergency line. An officer came out, walked the back lot, noted some minor disturbance in the gravel that was consistent with foot traffic, but not conclusive. The loading door hardware was changed within 2 days. The owner told me in a careful way that there had been an issue at the station years before I worked there, a person who had used the back lot and the building's blind spots for purposes he didn't fully elaborate on. He said he thought that had been resolved. He said it the way people say things when they're not entirely sure they believe their own reassurances. I worked at that station for another 3 months before I left for a different job. The evenings stayed quiet after the door hardware was changed. No more sounds from the back lot, no more smoke in the stockroom. But I never entirely stopped listening for the handle being tried. And every stockroom I've walked into since then, in every job since then, I notice the smell of the air when I enter. Fresh or stale, present or clear. That distinction matters. I wish I'd understood it sooner.
This one is mine, and it's shorter than the others because the thing that frightened me most about it happened fast, the way real things usually do. I was driving home from a friend's place, a trip that took me through the kind of rural stretch where the distance between lights is long enough that you actually start to feel the darkness as something with physical dimension. My fuel gauge had been low when I left, and I hadn't attended to it, which I regretted increasingly over about 40 miles before I found a station. It was just off the highway, down a short access road, a small independent station with 6 pumps, a lit canopy, and a convenience store that looked open based on the interior light, but turned out to be locked when I tried the door. A handwritten sign said the clerk was on break and would return shortly. The pumps were operational. I could pay at the pump. It was just past midnight. The access road behind me was dark. No other cars on the lot. I went to pump 7 because it was the closest. I ran my card, selected my grade, lifted the nozzle. Normal. I leaned against the side of my car while it ran, looking out at the access road and the dark field beyond the station's canopy light. That was when I noticed the car at the far end of the lot. It was parked away from the pumps, near the edge of the lot where the pavement ended and the gravel shoulder began. No lights. I hadn't seen it when I pulled in, which meant either I'd been inattentive or it had been parked there long enough that I'd unconsciously registered it as part of the station's background. Someone was in it. I could see the outline of a person in the driver's seat, not moving, just present. I watched it for a moment. The pump was still running. A parked car with an occupant isn't unusual. People wait in cars for all kinds of ordinary reasons. I looked back at the access road, then at the locked store, then at the car. The person in the car was looking at me. I couldn't see their face. The distance and the angle of the light made that impossible, but the direction of their silhouette had changed. They had been facing forward when I first noticed them. Now their head was turned, oriented toward where I was standing. The pump clicked off. I replaced the nozzle faster than was probably strictly necessary. I got in my car and started the engine. As I pulled toward the exit, my headlights swept the far end of the lot and lit up the parked car for a fraction of a second, long enough to see that the driver's window was down and that the person inside was still watching me go. I drove back to the highway and didn't stop again until I reached a brightly lit chain station at the edge of the next town, where I sat in a well-populated lot for 15 minutes before I felt settled enough to continue home. I've stopped at hundreds of gas stations in my life. I've been the only person on dozens of late-night lots. Most of the time, there is nothing. But something about that silhouette shifting, the head turning to track me, activated something I couldn't reason my way out of, some assessment the body makes below the level of conscious thought. I've learned to trust that assessment. I wasn't in a position to explain why the car at the edge of the lot felt wrong. I just knew it did, and I left. That's enough. That has to be enough. I worked the overnight shift at a small gas station and convenience store for about 14 months. It sat at the junction of two county roads, roughly 3 miles outside a town of maybe 6,000 people. The kind of station that's been there so long it's become part of the landscape. Older pumps, a narrow lot, a single attached bay where the owner did light mechanical work during the day. At night, it was just me, the fluorescent hum, and whoever happened to pull off the road between 11 and 7. Most of the overnight traffic was predictable. Long-haul drivers coming off the state route looking for coffee, a handful of locals I came to recognize by car and by habit, the occasional family on a night drive with restless kids. You develop a feel for the rhythm of those hours, and you develop, almost unconsciously, a feel for when someone or something breaks that rhythm. The man I'll call the regular first came in on a Wednesday in early November. He was unremarkable in almost every way. Middle-aged, dark jacket, the kind of tired face that belongs to someone who drives a lot. He bought a coffee, paid cash, and left without conversation. I didn't think about him after the door closed. He came back the following Wednesday. Same time, just past 2 in the morning. Same coffee, same cash, same silence. He glanced at me once when he was putting the lid on his cup, a neutral look, and walked out. By the 4th Wednesday, I had registered the pattern without meaning to. Something in the brain files this away without being asked. Same man, same night, same hour, same transaction. I mentioned it to the owner when I saw him during a handoff shift, half as small talk. He shrugged and said regulars were regulars, nothing to read into. The 5th Wednesday, the regular came in and did something different. Instead of going directly to the coffee station, he stopped just inside the door and looked at me. Not hostile, not warm, just a long, level look, the kind that has weight to it without being readable. Then he went to the coffee station, made his cup, paid, and before he walked out, he stopped at the door and said, without turning around fully, "You're here every Wednesday." It was a statement, not a question. I said yes, that was my shift. He nodded slightly and left. I stood behind the counter for a while after that. It was a small thing, a person observing a pattern the same way I had observed his, completely symmetrical, completely ordinary. I told myself that. The 6th Wednesday, he didn't come in. I noticed the absence the way you notice a sound stopping, not with alarm, just with awareness. I kept the counter between me and the door and watched the lot through the window. His car, which I had identified by then as a dark-colored, older model sedan, wasn't there. At 3:40 in the morning, I saw it, parked on the county road about 200 yards north of the station, facing the building. Engine off, no lights, just sitting. I could see it clearly because the station's exterior lighting threw enough glow to reach that stretch of road. The car was there when I looked at 2:40. It was still there when I looked at 3:20. When I looked at 4, it was gone. I called the owner when I got off shift. He listened and took it more seriously than I expected. He told me that starting the following week, he was going to cover my Wednesday nights himself and shift me to a different night rotation. He said it was for scheduling reasons. He didn't say it with much conviction. I worked that station for another 4 months on a different rotation and never saw the regular again. Whether he came in on other Wednesdays, whether the owner had his own encounter with him, I was never told. The owner was not a man who revisited things once he'd handled them. What I've turned over is that statement, "You're here every Wednesday." The delivery of it, the fact that he said it on the 5th week, after establishing, presumably, that the pattern was consistent, after confirming over 4 weeks that I was reliably alone in that building at that hour every Wednesday. He wasn't making conversation, he was confirming information. I think about that distinction more than I'd like to.